My name is Carrie Framstead. I'm a volunteer with Compassion and Choices. I've been living up here in Grand Marais for almost 4 years out on Pike Lake. And I want to thank Kelsey with Higher Education for putting all the details and stuff together, and our lovely Death Mulas for putting on this great topic and inviting me. Hi, come on in.
Hi.
And so just a little conversation about what we're going to talk about today. As you see, we're talking a little bit overview of what Compassion and Choices is, and talk a little bit about the bills, the 2 bills for the House and the Senate. And I've given you information basically to start off about them, and there's more information back at that table over by the water fountain thing and cups and stuff for you to take that can help you with some more information if you'd like regarding this topic. As well as I have my phone number and my email address down at the bottom of the page if you'd like some more specific questions later, or any other way that you want to be in touch with me. And then we'll also talk a little bit about the current status of the House and where we are with hopeful passage of legislation for next year. And then I also want to let everyone know, any question you have, just pop your hand up. Don't wait for later. Don't write it down. It's always great in the moment. And I always find that if somebody also have another question or had that question and appreciate you did it, or it leads to some others. And, I have a review of what we're talking about, but really what I'm giving you as a handout really does cover a lot of the meat and potatoes of what I'm talking about today for you. So you'll be able to take that with you. So, has anyone here heard of Compassion and Choices before? Raise your hand. Okay, fabulous. So Compassion and Choices is a national network. It's a nonprofit agency that works with different states, all the states. There's actually a network in every single state in the United States. And they are working with individuals in the state, such as myself. They'll have a campaign manager. And they are working towards that state being able to cross over and be able to allow some type of legislation, whatever it might be called, to be passed that would allow for end-of-life options or death with dignity, whatever that state has utilized for language to identify what that legislation is. So the discussion of the bill, I think it's been 8 to 10 years that Compassion and Choices has been engaged in Minnesota to try to galvanize support and move forward with this legislation. And they have been successful, I think, to have it come to the committee one time to be discussed at the Health and Financial Committee in the House. It was not able to come to any fruition in 2019 to pass out, and it never made it to the floor. So it has to go through the House first, and then to the floor, and then it goes to the Senate, to their committee, and then to their floor. A lot of hoops and a lot of turns in that whole process. And it did not happen this past year as well. They, Compassion and Choices or the legislation didn't move on it because they didn't have enough of the votes secured in the Senate. So they did not move forward with the bill in the House. And it was pretty overwhelming with so many topics that they already had for dealing with these committees that they got shoved. So we're hoping that it will at least come to committee for next year in February of 2024. Yes.
So what at this level could be done to help push that along? Or even
Yeah, I'm gonna get to that in a little bit. Thank you. That's a really good question. Like, how can all of you be champions if that is what you'd like to be and do? So this bill basically it's not something basic. It's a pretty huge endeavor. But what it does is it helps terminally ill adults with a prognosis of 6 months or less to live to have the option to obtain and take medication that will help them peacefully die in their sleep when they choose to, as opposed to having the illness that they have, that their terminal illness is, take them to the end of whatever that length of time on that road may be. And the bill is modeled after an Oregon bill called the Death with Dignity Act, and that was over 25 years ago. Oregon was the first state to bring that along and pass it. So we've had it in this country for 25 years. amazing to know that. I think the last state that was just legalized this legislation, I think it was New Mexico, and that was about 2 years ago. So there are 10 states, I have them listed on here: Washington, Montana, California, Hawaii, Colorado, New Mexico, New Hampshire, New Jersey, Maine, the E is dropped off of Maine, and the District of Columbia. They all have legalized legislation that allows this for an individual to access medical assistance in
But
there was.
you have to be a resident of the state, though.
That's a really good question. I think all the states so far in the District of Columbia were passed, their legislation was passed, that one of the requirements was that you had to be a resident of that state, yes. However, it has been challenged in court, and Massachusetts and Vermont and Oregon are the 2 states now that have had legalization that you do not have to be a resident of that state. Yeah, so there was, I imagine it comes about by patients are across the border and they have a doctor in the state that allows it. So somebody had sued the state then in order to take out that requirement. Kind of an interesting similar situation now, I think, with abortion laws and how that happens in some states, but it isn't in others, and how you can go across the border to access that health care, So Minnesota had it in their bill up until recently. Now they have taken it out, and I would imagine any state that is now working towards getting legislation passed at the state is no longer requiring that. So yeah, good question.
Awesome.
Yeah. So you have to be, this eligibility to be required is you have to be an adult 18 or older, a terminal ill person with less than 6 months to live, and you are mentally capable of making this informed healthcare decision. Really, really important. The key provisions that are listed down here below, and we don't have to go through all those in detail. They're really built in to provide safety nets to make sure that there isn't any coercion, that there isn't anybody that's being pursued by family or whomever to access this legislation, to access this medical procedure. And in the 25 years that it's been happening, there's never been an incident where there's been anything coerciveness or any legal action that's been taken. I think that's really clear to point out, because I know it crosses my mind to think that people can be very vulnerable in these situations, and there are provisions already set up that won't be the case. You have to have 2 doctors to confirm your illness. 90% of the individuals are in hospice already with 6 months or less to live. And this medication is received through your doctor. And the people can take it themselves with their family and loved ones, or hospice can step in also and help with administering that medication. Not administering it, mixing it up, giving it to you, maybe opening up, but the person has to be able to ingest it themselves. That was one of the first key provisions listed on there. 2 healthcare providers need to maintain that this person is terminally ill. A person can withdraw their request. So that's another interesting question. Sometimes people wonder, well, once somebody has gone through the motion of getting this medication, what happens if they don't want to use it? I don't have the statistic with me, but it's it's not 100%. Everybody that applies for this medical assistance and gets the medications, not everybody uses it. I think the typical message with it is that people feel comfortable. They know that if it got too difficult for them to manage the pain, they would have this as a way to out, a way to not have to suffer with the pain. And not everybody utilizes the medication once they have gotten it. So it's not 100%.
Well, to keep it from them transferring it to somebody else or selling it to.
Just like anything else that people can have medications at home. That's a really good question. And like I said, There hasn't been any documentation that something like that has happened. I had a nurse a couple weeks ago was talking about how they send patients home with all kinds of medications, really serious medications that you're to take on your own, and everybody knows anything on it's not just in your medicine cabinet or on your bed. Sometimes it's right by the television or it's right by your phone for your reminders to take it. So not to diminish the concern for that, but nurses have made it known to me that there is a lot of serious medication, pain medication out there in the community already. In people's homes that can be accessed by somebody that it's not for, right? Yeah. But that doesn't diminish the fact that that would be a concern, yes. Yeah, Kate.
I'm thinking about the 6-month deal, like that. It's determined you have 6 months to live, but what about someone who has dementia or anticipates or, beginning Alzheimer's or whatever, but then, I mean, can you sign up like 2 years ahead of time? And then when the terminal, whatever the terminal. illness-
Right, that's a really good question, Kate. This legislation only allows access to this medically assisted medication only for people with cancers, certain neurological diseases, ALS, some heart diseases that qualify for accessing this. Alzheimer's does not.
But what if a person with dementia developed cancer? And
Yeah.
before their dementia was too far gone, can they sign up for this?
Exactly. You can be living with a few illnesses and diseases and
For a long time.
yeah, and so if a person hypothetically had Alzheimer's, yes, I would think they would have to go through all the steps we just mentioned, that the cancer is likely going to kill if it is a cancerous type that it doesn't have treatment options, and they start progressing towards this end of 6 months and they're working with their doctor to talk about it as an option, I would think that would be open to them. Yeah.
Well, and I wonder if you have a power of attorney for healthcare and you have written instructions for that person. And maybe your power of attorney for healthcare could facilitate,
No, that really good question, and I like the thought process where you're going with that, but a person has to be able to make this decision and be, found to be of sound mind and be able to make the decision that they want to go this route for end of life and to get that medication. Power of attorney helps out with a lot of those other elements of plans and moving forward with others, but specifically for this, no, it would not happen. There was a family down in the city, and they were working with Compassion and Choices. The daughter was a death doula, and the mother had Alzheimer's for quite some time. And they had worked with Compassion and Choices to do some kind of documentary work with them. They came to a couple of speaking engagements to talk to the community. And as I mentioned, that Alzheimer's is not approved on the list because you don't know when somebody is going to die like you can with these other diseases, specifically with cancer, to be able to tell. The other option then would be to access something called voluntary stop eating and drinking, VSID. And that's the route that this family went when they, with the support of the husband and the children, that's the direction that is possible for someone who would have a disease, I guess, that wouldn't fall in this category for end of life. And that's what this family did. Yeah.
And is that true for all the states? No state has permission for dementia.
Correct. This specific end of life options act or death with dignity, whatever they are, the legislation is called around the country. It's specifically just for what I mentioned, the cancers. Yes. So that it really is specific and dials into just though. So it's not this great big giant entity. and it allows them, it's a struggle for folks that are wanting to ask, like the questions that you have with dementia. And that's just not what it's proved for to allow for.
And so who determines that criteria?
You'd be seeing a physician, you would have your doctor that you're working with. And in the states that have this legalization, then the doctors need to be informed about, here are the steps now within the state, and this is how people access it. And I think some of the states have had to go on and make some other tweaks and changes, so you can get access to a second opinion, you can facilitate this process, because some individuals are sort of late coming to this decision, and they end up dying before they can go through all the requirements to meet the specific requirements to make sure it's safe and that the wrong people are accessing this. And they haven't been able to do it because of the timeliness. So over the last 10, 15 years, states that have had to legalize access to this have had to make some tweaks and changes to streamline it, to shorten it, so there aren't people then that by the time they've decided, how long it takes to see a doctor.
Right.
And to have those things kind of slow that up to sort of help speed it along a little bit.
So really, this is like an early step, and I mean, it's focused right now on terminal illness, really, if you could narrow it down to, just to kind of summarize, and we're at early stages to facilitate that when somebody knows they have a terminal illness and they're headed on that path, to shorten that process to be able to
Right.
ward off this unnecessary suffering, right?
Exactly, yes. It'd be nice to see that that's kind of the trajectory or the continuum of healthcare when somebody is facing a terminal illness, that there's palliative care, there's hospice services, all these resources. And there's also this option. We can talk to you about it when you are ready, want to learn more about it, but to educate, make people aware that that's there.
At the beginning, I didn't think that it could bring peace for people, you get this terminal diagnosis and it's like, oh, I can take it, I don't have to suffer till the nth degree, and I would think it could be a peaceful option at the beginning, just knowing that you have that freedom, that choice.
Right. And people have shared that it allows them then to live the time that they have left with certainty of how they can navigate the end. When you don't have that certainty, I can't imagine what it's like trying to do every day that you're doing, and people you're with, and friends and family and doctor's appointments, and the uncertainty of how that's going to go, that there are people have shared that having that is a real safety net. They understand that how their end can be and will be, and that they're able to live a more richer and fuller, enjoyable remaining days of their life. Yeah, Nate.
Are you aware, Terry, of states like in Oregon, for example, that have had this law for some time? If doctors have gotten to a point of actually including it in their suite of options for somebody, instead of, for example, an oncologist who's been working with somebody with, cancer, and they've already gone through 3 courses of chemo, and now they're on radiation and things aren't going good. Does a doctor ever get to a point to say, here's another suite, or even earlier than that, here is this option here for you, this is available? I wonder about how forthright doctors are being about this idea of terminally ill, and then do they even bring that forward, or does somebody have to be their own advocate and figure it out themselves?
Well, what do you think?
Right. Well, it was a pretty loaded question.
I have no knowledge about that.
Yeah.
And I haven't asked that specifically of our network through Compassion and Choices with Minnesota. A specific question about that, like how is it rolled out in the states that have had it going for quite some time? And now even the more recent states, because it's more, I don't want to say common, but it's not like the beginning days. That's a really good question. It would seem like that would be the wish, that you would have that. However, what I can speak to is that there's a lot of lack of, in the medical training, in the medical field, on just approaching people with a different perspective with a terminal illness.
It kind of goes against, to me anyway, it seems like it kind of goes against the, let's say, Mayo, which is what we deal with, Western medicine, like we've got this to try and this, and that seems like what patients usually hear from the doctors.
Correct.
So it's, yeah,
Yeah.
Are any of our local doctors involved in helping with this organization and getting it passed or?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Be interesting to talk to Sandy Stover about this, because she's the one who got Care Partners when that all started.
Yeah.
Be interesting, she can call and ask.
She's not here.
You can still call her.
I know there's,
Sandy might know who's sympathetic.
I have heard through our organization that there are efforts around the country that have been going on for a year or two at least that about having more intention with the education of doctors and that are in training, you know, on being able to spend more time about how to be approaching and working with individuals with a terminal illness. As you were kind of alluding to, and it's just, yeah, it's our medical system is always about treatment and getting you through this illness, or how do you manage your illness better and living. And there isn't, you know, real kind of a strategic plan about how you also talk about this discussion, this element of it. And let the patient decide which way they want to navigate that. Yeah.
it would be, it seems like could be another thing we can be doing while we're well. And if we can have 5 more minutes with a doctor, we can like advocate for the, with the doctors that might know us.
Good point.
Say, hey, you know, are you aware, or how do you feel about this?
We all have an opportunity, whether it's book club, swimming, at your doctor's office. I think that's going right to the office and actually speaking with, be interested to get their input on it. But yeah, all of us have opportunities to talk about this topic and this elephant in the room that's not going anywhere. And for some people, they have a lot of experience or exposure to it, and others maybe not so much. But it's on its way. It will be in front of you at some point or another. And to have some conversation about how to the language to use and to navigate it, and just to be able to listen to people is so important. Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
When I was talking to my oncologist, I said, you know, I'm not really interested in doing what you're telling me to do. What do you think? And I had some other ideas, integrative medicine and some things. And she said, you know, I completely agree with you, but as an oncologist, my only role is to tell you the traditional treatment for your type of cancer. So I think personally, they probably have a lot of empathy with the patients that, you know,
Sure.
just aren't. So I think they're open, but in their profession, they just can't.
Yep, I think it's very true.
Yeah, and then I did have a physician's assistant a year after the oncologist, and she's just on the same page, but she said, you know, I can't encourage this, but, you know, I understand.
It seems to me like it's gotta be really consumer driven, because just the choices, I mean, that's, our whole society is filled with having to make choices and us taking a stand for what we believe in against the status quo, you know, yeah. And
At this time in someone's life, we should be able to have this opportunity to make this choice.
But I remember so distinctly when I grew up in California, when this was going on in Oregon, when they were, you know, and it was the whole idea of the slippery slope. That's what people
Yeah.
were afraid of,
Yeah.
especially spiritual, you know, Christian communities. It's this slippery slope, but it looks like they've kind of taken care of that in a way, you know, because they're not allowing dementia people, they're not allowing people who are incapacitated, they're not allowing them to have somebody else administer, I mean, it's like assisted suicide. Well, this isn't, it's them exercising a personal choice over, abortion, the same thing. Regardless of people's moral backgrounds, it comes up to the choice of the individual to pursue it.
Yeah.
And this sounds to me like a beginning stage. These other things, the options are coming, but this is definitely a big step for people. Like, we had in our community, somebody shot himself when he found out he had terminal illness, so people don't want to linger and suffer, and it's a hideous thing. And who wants to sit and watch their loved ones just fade away and just die? There's nothing you can do. Watch them in pain or drug them up so they're not in pain. It's a difference.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have to be drugged up, but I have, you don't know what it's like working in a nursing home at 2, 3 a.m. Watching these people in horrible.
I understood. I watched my mom die. And Sandy Stover actually told me, she said, morphine will hasten her death. And it's absolutely, it's like when you're sitting there watching them struggle to hear, you want relief for them.
And when my parents, mom had the stroke, and when my parents were going, I made sure that they had all pain medicine. But I know if, like my father, if he could have not suffered like that, he would have chosen this in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
I think the people that really are against it are afraid of dying, kind of, or have never actually had to watch people die.
Yeah.
When they die after that shit.
Yeah.
And, sometimes it goes so peacefully, but
Sometimes they don't.
oh, it's horrible, and they just linger, and it's like, it breaks your heart. It really does, so.
Well, it's pretty clear, as you can see on the handout, that in 2016, the State Fair had a survey, and who doesn't trust a good State Fair survey? Very, very well attended. I know the 2016 survey was across a lot of demographics, unbelievable demographics, age, sex, religion, education, you name it. 68% of people felt that somebody facing late term stages of a terminal illness should have the right to be able to make this decision. And then just this past year, it wasn't as intense of a survey as 2016, but you can see that I think it was 8,000 people, the percentage is higher. So yeah, to speak to the general public wanting and thinking a person should be able to make their own bodily autonomy decision on that, yes. And you're right when you talked about, well, it would be nice if those that are in question of it and have concerns can read how difficult it is to qualify for it, all the requirements, all the provisions that are in place to make sure that there isn't anything illegal going on and that it's only being utilized by those that meet the requirements, that would be sufficient, but it isn't. So our job now is to listen really strongly to those that have a different opinion of it and try to understand how we can maybe utilize different language within our bill within Minnesota that would help them feel less concerned that there is the slippery slope. I hear that lots of times. If you pass this legislation, what's going to come next? And there's been no, in the last 25 years since it started, there's been no additional health group of individuals like chronic pain or Alzheimer's being added to this list. It's nothing that's ever been added, but that is a concern. And it's information that's pumped out there and put out there to gain people's momentum to be against legislation like this. The disabilities community is very concerned. Rightfully so, the disabilities community has had a long haul for 60, 70, 80 years, right? They've come a long way for children and adults to have laws in place to protect them for housing, for working and such. And the concern there is real. But there's nothing in place here to talk at all about multiple sclerosis, any type of childhood or adult disabilities that people have. You brought up a really good point. What if somebody has a disability, but later they get cancer? So it's these concerns that come up that people have and they just don't even want to get there. And we can all understand talking about death is not easy. We don't do it enough in our families. You know, who starts that conversation at Thanksgiving? You know, it's just not something to talk about. Or as I mentioned earlier, your book club, but I feel like we have these opportunities to have conversations, whether you're talking to your, you know, like-minded individuals or not. I think it's a great opportunity for us to have a conversation because we can always learn from somebody else. We can always learn another angle of concern or fear they might have and identify with it. And they may never understand your side of it, but I think that the time that we can put together and listen and support one another, at least just agree to disagree on things. However, allow people when the majority want access to something and it's probably helpful that we can pass the legislation to make it possible. The other comment is just assisted suicide. Well, I find that very demoralizing and so disrespectful. Suicide is a serious matter. People that don't even have terminal illness commit suicide. Police officers die at the hands of their own guns higher than they do on the job. Yeah, so when it's utilized in that way and they talk, this is just assisted suicide, I have a very difficult time listening to that and trying to have a conversation about how I totally don't agree with that.
Well,
It's
is
the
that
illness
someone
that's
like
killing
this
them.
to just shut you down instead of actually being curious and wanting to know, like, do they even want to care? To me, that's
It
almost like-
depends, and sometimes you just can't have a conversation, you have to walk away, you know? There's lots of topics that cause that. Not just death and dying, right? Yeah, and you know, maybe that was just, it can be a real hot button for some individuals, and they're just not ready to talk about it. But you're right, people with terminal illnesses have gone to great lengths to take their own life. And it's a sad, terrible thing to have happen, that they have pushed to the point where that's their only option. Nobody knows how they're feeling. They don't say goodbye to anybody.
We hear some of the stories about people who do plan this, you know, and the quality of time. And I would think that it, you know, and trauma is such a buzzword these days. I mean, think about the families that are left behind. It's the same thing with suicide. It's the families or loved ones that get left behind that are traumatized by it and never get over it.
Exactly. Now they're facing a whole nother level of things that they have to now deal with.
Yeah.
I was doing home care for a man well into his 90s, and he just had an awesomely wonderful life. You know, just almost up to where he was at when I was with him. But he was at a point where he was gonna need to go in a nursing home, and he knew he was just gonna get worse and worse with what his medical situation was. So one night I was getting him ready for bed, and he took a knife to bed with him. And it was so upsetting to me as a caregiver. It's like,
And there's nothing.
and what do you do? Because I totally agreed with him. If I had been in his situation, it's like now is the time, he's at home, he's happy. He has a little bit of quality of life. But yeah, he ended up having to go in the nursing home because I felt like compelled to tell the nurse about it because I was the
Right.
person at the bottom of the totem pole.
Mandatory reporting.
Mandatory reporting,
So I-
yeah, so it would be really nice for Minnesota to be able to allow our citizens this opportunity to make this decision on their own, to receive this medically assisted procedure.
And then meanwhile, I have a niece that took her own life with, you know, overdose. I mean, how many, what is it, 100,000 a year can just go out on the street and buy medication
I would like
and take
another
their own
option.
life.
Yeah, than to go on the street and hope I'm gonna OD on fentanyl. Or
Yeah,
something, yeah, like I would know how. You know, but I've had people talk about that. I knew, when I lived in Washington, I knew somebody that went out on the street and just bought drugs. And that was their assisted suicide or their whatever, you know, I mean, because they're not gonna die like that. well, that's not an option for me.
Just crazy.
Or any of us normal people, I mean, I wouldn't know how to go buy drugs in the street, but I depend on it, you know, seriously.
Watch what community you say that in, because there's going to be somebody who would help you out with that.
Actually, but, you know, I mean, but I've known people who, that would be their only option. Well, that's no kind of peaceful way to go.
Yeah, you never know what you're getting.
Or they save medication for 2 years so I can, take all the pills at once or something, you know, that's.
You see down at the bottom, resource listed there, When My Time Comes by Diane Reed. With PBS, she did a wonderful documentary regarding this with her husband's disease. And then How to Die in Oregon. This is about a film where a gentleman is terminally ill and he accesses through hospice this ability to take his medication. And they're just really good 2 resources to be able to watch if you'd like to see some documentaries on it. And the speaking to what you guys are talking about, having this ability to plan your goodbye to everybody, it's really touching with How to Die in Oregon. And it's kind of long, but it's because they follow a couple of individuals in Oregon that have the law passed. It's good to watch. So we were talking about Minnesota and where we're at with this legislation, and the League of Women Voters supports us, or they are endorsing this legislation. The National Association of Social Workers Minnesota chapter, the Humanists Amendment, the VFL Senior Caucus, Rainbow Health, and then the neutral entities or organizations is the Minnesota Medical Association, and the Libertarian Party has given support to in their platform. So I think the League of Women Voters just last year made it a critical element of concern for things that they were endorsing and supporting in the state. We had our Senator Grant Hochschild was elected last year, and he is in support, has been in support of this bill when I was in conversations with him leading up to his election. And he is, we're now wanting to continue thanking him for his support and the wonderful work that he's done at the Capitol so far in his short career as a senator. And we're also leaning into asking him if he can be more of a champion for compassionate choices and in this legislation, for him to reach out to his peers on other committees in the Senate and have those conversations that we were just talking about with other folks who could have a great impact for next year in February when they return to session in 2024, when we start bringing up all the bills that are to be heard. I can't imagine what that work must be like, but it sounds incredible to hopefully get this bill to the committees and get all the committees then to go to the floor of the House and the floor of the Senate for votes. We are sitting pretty good with this House. There should be enough votes once it got out of committee for it passed in the House floor. It's the Senate that's a little, well, as it sits right now, we wouldn't get a vote yes passed at the Senate. Even though we have 34 votes to pass it, two Democratic senators are hardline against this legislation. One with the concern for disabilities, has a disabled daughter, and another senator that I think leans towards the concern of assisted suicide element. So those are roadblocks of being able to get this legislation passed
Are
this
they up
next
for
year.
election?
No, the Senate is every 4 years, so they have another 3 years to be in office, and they've been in office for some time. Yeah.
How do we find out who they are, so when they are up for election, we can vote against them?
Well, they're not in your district is the deal. Yeah, so Compassionate Choices just has a lot of networking to do in the constituents that are in their districts. And, even if I could remember who they are, I would no need to even mention it today because it's really out of our deal. I do have postcards here. A postcard that's for Compassionate Choice, and it talks about the facts about medical aid and dying. And, you can, write Grant Houschild's name on the back. I have it already addressed and stamped, and you can put your little personal story and reason why, or thanking him for his support, and you could mail those out. And then I also have one for, even though it's Roger Scrava, if I pronounce it right, Republican, he is an individual that is open for conversation from his constituents. Now granted, he's a House representative, and as I shared, I believe we have the House wrapped up for votes, but it's never too late to have conversations with somebody who likely might not, might not even be hearing about this topic from anybody, right? So I have some postcards that can be sent to Roger as well as Grant Houschildt. And if you want to email Grant Houschildt, I have his email address if you would like. Yes,
You said there's likely the votes to get it passed in the House,
yes.
so why not put it strategically in an omnibus bill on health policy? Then you've got.
Yeah,
something
if I think I know what you're asking about, so it's like an overall vote by the whole state to vote on that, is that?
Well, there'd be other health policies, usually they call them omnibus bills, and it's one way to circumvent if you don't have the votes in the other body, and then you negotiate with it. At least it gets you in play.
You know a lot more about it than I do. I
I
don't-
serve as a lobbyist now, and not in this area, but
Okay,
I used to be a legislator.
all right, so you have some experience with that and knowledge about how that works. That's a good question. I'll have to ask about that, why there isn't an omnibus bill in the House.
Yeah, I mean, Senator Wickland, health policy chair in the Senate, she'll play ball with you. You've got your chief authors, Dr. Mann, and the other physician, they're all on this committee. And if they just know it's coming in a health policy bill, they don't even have to vote in committee.
So basically what you're saying is, because I've heard how they sneak stuff in through.
That's one way of putting it.
In a big package, and yet they get things passed, then you know,
And then nobody knows.
Yeah, then they can say I was against it, I was voting against it, but
Oh,
it's, get it in this bill.
under the table ways of getting things done.
Makes it easier for the two senators that would not necessarily have to take a direct vote.
Right.
More on a overall analysis.
right. I think part of the message is that these two senators really do want to have a vote, be involved with the
Yeah,
vote.
I mean, ultimately, if you did get agreed to, they could vote, but they say, well, I was voting for these 6, 7 other things.
Other things that are stacked.
They'd
with
have
that.
to cover.
Okay, it's interesting, thanks for bringing that up on that, I can inquire more about that. I have learned a lot over the last 3 years, more about politics, than I thought I would ever know, but it's a deep topic, definitely, yes.
In the states that have passed the bill, do you know like how much the medications cost, or are they paid for through Medicare or a supplement or a prescription drug plan?
I think, what did I look at here recently? You have to pay for your doctor's appointments. And I think the medication may run from $800 to $1,000. So for some individuals, that is financially a big push to be able to jump through all the medical hoops and the solid mental health passage as well, that should be examined for that, and then the medication, so it ends up being a bit of a, white privilege access for this medical care is also being talked about, and but yeah, it can be expensive for some individuals that don't have a lot of extra cash flow to be able to access it, and that can be a problem. It might be something that's a deterrent for someone to be able to access it, yes. Yeah.
What why couldn't you just put it on your credit card? What are they gonna do to call it? I mean, seriously, if you're poor, you shouldn't be discriminated against if you can't afford this and it's an option.
First time I've ever heard somebody mention that. On a credit card.
But I mean, because really, it shouldn't be a white privilege or any kind of privilege. I know a lot of poor white people, you know, but, I just assumed your insurance would pay for it.
Not everybody gets, depending on how old you are maybe and what your insurance is.
I can't, wow.
I wonder, what does, Art have a position on this?
It's a good question. We just had this conversation. We had a little bit of a workshop a few weeks ago for the Minnesota Volunteers for Compassion and Choices to get us ramped up about getting ready for next year. And it was brought up and no, they are not saying anything. Yeah. They don't wanna- Apparently, like, don't want to touch that topic.
Rock the boat.
Well,
Rock
they've
the
just
boat.
gone so far from where they really got going.
Politics is intense in our country. I mean, I'm not signing up to be a politician, so I can't complain and criticize them too badly.
Well, look, at families are fighting among themselves,
I know.
but
I read a book by one of the senators and he talked about how what it takes, this is a sideline thing, but why some senators stay there, because it's so complex that they need to learn the skills. And it's a complex system, and like he said, they took the movement and getting things moving, and they learn those skills, how to do that, and there's strategies to do that, and we don't know half of what's going on this level of.
No, we really don't. To navigate that system and get things passed, even when your constituents want it, it's not an easy task to pull off. Any other questions? If anybody hasn't asked
I
a
thought
question
the
yet?
medical associations were opposed to this. Am I reading this right, that the Minnesota one?
Oh,
it's
Minnesota Medical Association is taking a neutral stance.
Oh, okay.
So there have been some agencies that were a no before, and to navigate into a neutral area, is
It's
it
a
really?
big
Yes,
progress.
yes, that is.
Oh, my gosh.
Yes, that is.
Okay. So somebody's been working on it.
It'd be even like if you were for it, but your political affiliation isn't, are you sick that day and you're gonna take a bathroom break or whatever, something that you're not gonna be there to actually be there to have to be put in a position to cast a vote when it's not really how your constituents want you to be represented.
Interesting.
So my reason for volunteering with Compassion and Choices is that I had the personal experience of my wife was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer in June of 2019. And she only lasted 8 months. And there wasn't any conversation about what other options that you want to explore. We had a fantastic oncologist down at Mayo. And we got involved with palliative care pretty quickly. And from what I understand, that's kind of a service that people aren't really knowledgeable about. They are fantastic. They just can talk to you in such a way that the oncology and everyone in that department just doesn't have that ability to just sit down with you and you feel like you're really talking to a person. And they're helping you in language that you can understand, navigate how to understand these medications and how best to use them. But it would have been really nice to have had at some point a conversation about what we were just talking about, like earlier, of if you don't want to do treatment, or at some point treatment isn't for you, we're here to talk about these other options for you. You're just never given that kind of a conversation. And you're in shock over the situation. And I know it was important for my wife to not have to lose her quality of life and to be able to manage the pain. And there's, I think, about a 25% of of individuals dying from terminal illnesses that our current medical profession is not able to manage pain, no matter what they say. It is just, you just
Drag them
can't,
out
you
and
just
knock
can't
them
do
out
it.
altogether, yeah.
Yeah, and we had fabulous hospice down in Rochester. They did everything they possibly could, but, those two very important elements that she wanted were just, not possible at all.
Are they
So you were
willing
living
to,
in Rochester through that?
We were living up here, but we went down to Rochester
Right.
to access hospice.
Yeah.
Because it would have been absolutely impossible to do what we had to go through up here.
they weren't willing to just put her in a coma even at the end there?
No, that's not the role, it's just to help, you know, make it comfortable for you as best they can, and,
But there's a limit.
yeah.
Yeah,
So it was shortly after that that I read in the paper, Compassion and Choices, death with, end of life options, and I've been involved with it ever since, to some degree or another. If you haven't done it yet, you can go online and look up, Compassion and Choices for Minnesota, and you can get a plethora of information, personal stories, you can do some donations on there if you want to. It's just, you can like it on Facebook. I just got on Facebook. Not quite sure why I did it, but I did it anyway. So, so you can like these things and pass it on. That's another way to get information out about, death and dying and, this legislation for the state. So it's been a journey, and, you just don't, I've learned you just don't have these conversations until all of a sudden it becomes your personal norm. And then you want to have those conversations with individuals, and it's always been the, well, when I'm with the death duelists and other people who volunteer with Compassion and Choices, I feel like I'm with another family.
Mhm.